Book discussion, Stephen Mandis, What Went Wrong with the US Men's National Team. As I do often on this podcast, I discuss books that I've read. There's a couple of reasons why I do that. One is I want to keep a record of my own reading. Second, the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So I think reading is, like I said many times here, it is conditioning of the mind. So I just want to encourage people to take this very seriously. Reading is conditioning of the mind. The hedge fund business is a creative business where the mind actually has a big role to play, where your uniqueness, your unique approach to things actually eventually decides between wealth generation and not wealth generation. And third, these books very often actually have a practical implication for the business. And this is a very good example. This is a book about sports. This is a book about a team, the US men's national team. By the way, it's a soccer national team, just to be clear about that. And it talks about how to build a team, how to win. And those are, of course, things that matter in business and for the hedge fund business as much as they do for sports. This is a Not Even Wrong podcast. It's September 3rd, 2021. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is down 1.4%. The market's down 20 basis points. For the year, we are up 14%. The market's up 20.6%. We're underperforming by 6.6%. The market is still open, so these numbers could change. Stephen Mandis is a Columbia Business School professor. He talks about culture. He talks about sports teams. He talks about how culture and sports and organization of sports teams can lead to winning. And I think I'm pretty sure he's using that as a business school professor, of course, not just as a metaphor. So this is actually a real business. As for example, one of the very successful German coaches, Ralf Rangnick, actually has a consulting company now that goes around the world and helps teams build winning organizations. So this is a real issue, real problem, real thing. Let's call it a thing, to use a Silicon Valley term here, that people go around and tell other organizations in the sports business how to organize themselves to win. So I think what Stephen here is doing is a very useful thing, not just for sports fans, but also for people who are in the business. So I want to discuss the book and then talk about the implications and sort of the inspiration that I took from him. So the book is about basically the US men's national team and explaining a little bit the history of the national team and why it was successful in certain parts of that history and then and less successful in other parts. Now, the background of this book is maybe obvious. I just want to state it. The U.S. men's national team soccer has been traditionally sort of not very well followed, not very well, let's say, funded endeavor in the US because other sports are more important. Nevertheless, the US men's national team has been successful and then also has had less success and then has been successful again, and so on and so forth. So what Mandis is trying to say here is that this is not an organically grown sport, let's say a la baseball, football, and basketball, that is just super successful, that has all the money and all the talent and the best of the best play here. This is a sport that is kind of a little bit on the back burner here in the US, but nevertheless has success, nevertheless has a following. It is an emotional following. It's not necessarily the kind of following where you have 100,000 people go to a Patriots game and 100,000 people go to a Niners game. It's not that kind of following. You have a following, but there's a core fan base, very much, let's say, Latino-based, European people with European descent, like me, for example. I live in the United States and I follow soccer, I follow MLS, but it's not the kind of league that everybody follows. In particular, people outside the U.S. absolutely don't follow U.S. soccer, so it doesn't have that pull. But it has a certain pull, and Mandis is talking about the spirit of '76. So he's saying that what happened in the US in the beginnings, so this is now prior to 1994 and the success of 1994 when the World Cup was held in the US, and the US did pretty well by reaching the round of 16 with a team that absolutely was the underdog. He's talking about the spirit of 76. So this is one of the main points of Mandis, which is the spirit of underdog. So he's talking about a culture, about a spirit that is inherent in the US, and that is that the US either likes to be the underdog or they like to dominate. Both are fine. And the underdog concept is the spirit of 76 concept. He refers to the revolution of 1776 and the being the underdog, Washington going against the British crown, winning, and that feeling is still with the United States. We had the same thing with hockey in 1980 with the Olympics when the underdog team of the US won against the Soviet Union back then. So I want to say that before I go further, I just want to discuss this point a little bit. I think Mandis is right about this. I think the US likes underdogs, but honestly, who likes underdogs? We like underdogs that win. So if you then extrapolate this argument, in my view, what the US really likes, what the US public likes is winners. And if they can come from an underdog situation, even the better. But what we don't like is underdogs that lose. So in that sense, I think Mandis is a little bit twisting his words here. In the end, if you watch the NBC Olympics coverage as a foreigner, it's so obvious that the US is only interested in winners, because what NBC is showing is from all the sports in the Olympics, they only pick the ones where the US wins. And occasionally, very interesting, for example, surfing was the first time surfing was on the Olympics in Tokyo, and the winner was Italo Ferreira, who was a Brazilian, and even that wasn't shown. Even though surfing is, I would say, it's almost there's three countries in the world that follow surfing: Australia, US, and Brazil. And you would have expected the US to follow this event, at least people on the West Coast and all that, but no, because no American was a winner, it was kind of, who cares? So I'm just pointing out this example to say that we really only care about winners. And I think the one criticism I would have about Stephen Mandis's book is that, listen, you can talk about spirit of this, spirit of that as much as you want. What you really need is a winner, because otherwise people won't be interested. So that brings me to the second point here, and this is more concrete, where Mandis actually talks about the concept of what it takes to be a winning organization. So he goes much more into detail now about things like, let's say, players that have exposure to the top teams in Europe, that have exposure to top training, and that is really what comes down to the nitty-gritty of winning. He's also saying that in 1994, the reason the team did so well, other than having home team advantage, was the fact that they were training for 2 years at this somewhere down in Southern California. They were paid by the government to train, and those were college kids. Those weren't professionals. But because they had this enormous exposure, they were able to actually pull off an upset and do really well at the World Cup. But what it really takes in the end is a well-trained, well-educated base of players. And the question now is, of course, how do you get that? And that, to me, that is coming to the core of the issue. Mandis says that what the US needs is a more American style of play. It will win it will do well on two different vectors if that could happen. Number one, the US actually would have a better chance of winning because they would develop a US style of play that is, of course, geared towards winning. And second, it would get more legitimacy within the US, because if it's a US style of play versus trying to mimic a European style of play, then the American audience would be more receptive to the game. This is what he's saying, and this is where I completely agree. And I think, here's the thing, this goes back to 0 to 1. This is the core of also our concept here at Orange Capital Partners, the way we see, let's say, businesses. You need to have a unique approach. You cannot just copy somebody else and then try to win. You can't even win with numbers. You can't even win with numbers. Okay, meaning, yeah, we have 300 million people here. So if we just do what the Europeans do and we have so many more people than Germany or France, we will win. that's not, that's just not how it works. What the Europeans have done, intentionally or unintentionally, has developed their own culture, their own way of playing. The Germans have their own way of playing. The French have their own way of playing. The Spanish have their own way. All these people have their own way of playing, and that's why they're successful. It's not because the sport is more popular there or any of that stuff. So what the US needs is a more unique US way. And I want to add a third point here, which is if we had a more American way of playing, then the kids would be more excited and we would have a lot larger of a talent pool to draw from, because right now the kids are not excited. The kids actually don't come and play. They want to play other sports because US soccer doesn't have the kind of legitimacy that is necessary to excite the young people. It doesn't have the kind of legitimacy to excite the young people. And this is one of the things, before I now go to my conclusion of the book and my takeaway, I just want to add one more thing that Stephen Mandis is saying, which is really important. He's saying that it is very important to have the why. The why. So what he's saying is that when you have a sport like soccer, which doesn't have the legitimacy that basketball or football have, you need to develop a why. People want to know, why am I watching this? Why is this relevant? Why is this important for me? Why are these people training and playing? That traditionally has not been the case with the United States soccer teams, not just team, but teams. So in that sense, we need a why. And now I want to get back to my conclusion. When Stephen Mandis talks about the American way of play, unfortunately, he's not very clear what that means. And I think people like Alexi Lalas and like that make a little bit of fun of him for that. Because what does it really mean, American play? Now, I have a suggestion here. My suggestion would be that for the US soccer culture to thrive nationwide in a real substantial way, we should start incorporating some of our other sports, in particular football, and some of baseball and some of basketball, but in particular football, into the game of soccer, and make it a blend of American sports culture instead of just soccer. Now, we would still call it soccer and all that, but that's not the point. What I'm trying to say here is that we can actually take from these other sports, for example, if we had a defensive coordinator, an offensive coordinator within a soccer team, and structured the team along the lines of offense and defense the way football is done, I think a lot of good things would happen. If we had more specialization and special focus training, I think it would be, because this is an American culture to specialize. Football, to me, as an immigrant to the United States, I came to the United States when I was around 30 years old. So I was already developed as a professional, and I had the luxury to see cultural differences. And one of the big cultural differences in the work culture of the United States is that everybody here is a lot more specialized than in Europe. Now, maybe in Europe people are specialized too, but they're not explicitly specialized. You're not explicitly called, you're not explicitly being given tasks that are so special. Versus here, it's very clear, and people are very careful also about not stepping into other people's gardens, if you will, and all that. That is one of the things that I think is unbelievably important, and that's where I would start. So what I think, here's my thesis and my takeaway from this book, and it's a very inspiring book on that front. I think US soccer culture suffers because it's trying to mimic European-style soccer. It's infiltrated with European coaches and Hispanic coaches who are then again infiltrating their culture, which is kind of a Hispanic flair of European culture, into the US soccer culture. I would, if maybe I'll do that. One day I'll buy a team and try to do it. I don't think one should throw away everything, but one should mix this European/Hispanic culture of soccer with a US touch. And that is, again, you bring in, let's say, a defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator. You have the quarterback coach would be the coach, let's say, that coaches the number 6 in soccer, how to distribute the ball. You have the goalie coach, and to some extent that's happening right now. The goalies become more like the first man of the attack. They have more strategic thinking and all of that stuff. So there is a lot more specialization and a lot more also spiritual attributes that people have. You're not just a team. You are the quarterback. You are the receiver. You are the kicker. The same way in soccer, I could see that if we give more strategic positions to people and train them that way, and also have coaches who are specialized on those types of situations, I think it would increase the legitimacy of the game within the US, because the kids could then relate to that, because they already know that from football and other sports, in particular football. Basketball has its I would say has also its uniqueness. I think the gameplay in basketball is one of the things. Why don't we have gameplay in soccer? Why don't we have, let's say, when we have a free kick, we call a number, like in basketball, 75, and then people have a certain code that they adjust to. Why don't we do things like that? Again, some of that is happening. The Brits did that in Russia in 2018. There was a special sort of corner formation that was new. Things like that are happening. I mean, I'm not saying the soccer culture is sleeping also, but I think that the US has this opportunity, sort of as an emerging market in soccer, to throw away some of the old stuff, the legacy stuff, which might work or might not work, but maybe doesn't work as well for us Americans here, and try some of the new stuff that come from the US soccer culture in specific. And I think that would be something that I would like to try. That would be something that I would be very excited about, let's say, to buy a team or invest a team. It is much more exciting than have teams that come up now in MLS that all they do is doing the same like everybody else. They have a stadium, they put 200 million, they have a deal with the city, they want to foster soccer culture in the city. They bring in those ultra fans with their drums and their scarves, which is all like, basically, if I watch a Bundesliga game, that's how it looks in Germany. That's fine, but I would say if you had a real American experience, there would be tailgating. There would be things like the basketball thing, where maybe some of the players, they are embedded in the rap culture. Whatever it is, I think those things would go a long way if we could sort of form an American culture of soccer. Mandis talks about the names. Why is Dallas FC called Dallas FC? DC United, all these things. Why? Why can't we just have our own names? The San Francisco 49ers, the New York Patriots, the New England Patriots. Why don't we call teams like that? And for example, there's an example in Europe, just to finish this episode. Even in Europe, people have tried new things. Red Bull is a good example. Red Bull is trying a new approach of soccer development in Europe. Just not to elaborate too much, it's an organization. They have several teams. One is in Salzburg, Red Bull Salzburg. One is in Leipzig, Red Bull Leipzig. And then also in the US, we have Red Bull New York, and so on and so forth. Actually, this person that I mentioned, Ralf Rangnick, he was very successful within that Leipzig organization. And they tried something new, and they're very successful. And why not try something, again, new, something US-centric, new, something with a US touch that, in my view, could be very, very successful. This would be my takeaway from this book. So to summarize, Stephen Mandis, What Went Wrong with the US National Team, it is a book about soccer in particular, but it has more general takeaways, inspirations for how to organize winning organizations, what it takes, the spirit, the culture, the approach, all these things that we think are incredibly important also in business, in particular 0 to 1. I think also a little bit the innovation stack. I think you can use the innovation stack concept, or the principle that is part of our principle stack, also in sports. How can you start building an innovation stack that leads you towards new insight, new developments, new skills, new ways to solve problems, instead of just trying to copy other people? Why not try to do something new? I think these concepts are deep. They apply to not just business and wealth generation, but also to sports. In that sense, also, I want to bring in David Deutsch here and Karl Popper. These are hard to vary explanations, because they're also general. They're generalizable explanations for how to succeed, because you can generalize it for a US team, the US national men's soccer team. You can generalize it for businesses, for wealth generation. This is a beautiful example of an explanation that is applicable in a general way, hard to vary, and therefore it's a good explanation. In a Karl Popper way, it's an explanation that we should be banking on that we should be using to apply it to other areas, and this type of explanation will help us succeed in solving problems that we face in our lives. Thank you.